What's up guys, Justin Morgan here, and this video is going to cover some topics that have been popular in YouTube fitness over the last couple days regarding the deadlift. One video in particular was made by Jason Blaha, and he was kind of going over some things, or I think he was using it more as like a way to say why he has disliked Alpha Destiny and the rack pulls and those kinds of lifts, but he linked to a very good video by where Dr. Eric Helms, Dr. Mike Israetel, and Mino Henselson were discussing why the deadlift is not a very good hypertrophy exercise. And what I think a lot of people took away from that video was that they should not deadlift. And I don't think that's what they were saying. I think they were pointing out that the deadlift is not a very good hypertrophy exercise. If you're wanting to build up your hamstrings, glutes, your spinal erectors, or your lower back, the muscles that you could hopefully see in your lower back if your body fat's low enough, then the deadlift probably does not make the single best exercise for that. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, and that doesn't mean that it won't lead to hypertrophy. And I want to talk about that because Jason Blaha actually made a really good follow-up video, I thought, where he kind of discussed some areas. I'll be covering kind of different things than he did. But there are some very good reasons to do the deadlift, but probably not to train at a higher volume. And one of the reasons, the biggest reason that the deadlift does not make a very good hypertrophy exercise is because when you compare the amount of muscular growth that it produces with the amount of fatigue that's generated, which will cause you to need to take more frequent deloads or recovery areas where you actually allow those muscles to recover, it's just too great. There's too much fatigue generated with not enough hypertrophy to call it a really good hypertrophy exercise. So I'll talk about some really good alternatives and how to do that, but what I would recommend is that the deadlift can be a really good exercise in that it allows you to get a lot of muscles to work all together at the same time. So when you go back maybe last month sometime, I talked about a research study that was done comparing fatigue generated in the deadlift versus the squat, and what they found was that there was not a noticeable difference, or a difference that would make any sizable amount when done at very low volume. So they were comparing sets of 1 to 2 in the two exercises. Now, one of the things that I pointed out in that video was that the deadlift probably was not done with a eccentric loading part. So they did the concentric part where you stand up with the deadlift, and they probably kind of let it free fall or kind of guided it to the ground, but without being in a controlled manner. So that was one area that I pointed out. So in that sense, that the study was really only comparing the concentric portion of the deadlift to the concentric and eccentric loading portion of the squat. The other factor in that was that I can't remember what I was going to say. I guess that's why it's good to take notes on some of these videos. Anyways, if I think of it, I'll come back to that. But when we kind of move on, there are some really good ways to train the deadlift so that you get the benefits of it, getting a lot of muscle groups to work together at one time. It lets you train in such a way that you're able to build strength, and that will hopefully carry over to other movements like the squat, which you typically are able to do at better volumes. And by doing that, that actually allows you to accumulate more fatigue in those lifts that will translate over to hypertrophy. There's just some general things like that that make the deadlift a really good exercise to do. So I want to talk about how to train it and variations that you can use that are really good for hypertrophy, and that you can kind of integrate in addition to deadlifting, and then you should be able to get the benefits of a hypertrophy related program with also getting the benefits of strength related to deadlifting. So a lot of the kind of beginner programs feature 1 time per week deadlifting, even though they might do up to 3 times per week squatting. And when they do the deadlift, they'll have you work up to say a 5 rep max if you're doing a 5x5 type routine. So that is probably a good method or good way to think of it, to go about it. Another thing that you could do, as you continue to progress on, keeping that same idea of having like a one top set where you do the deadlift, and that kind of gets those strength gains or strength adaptations from training, but then you might use other exercises for hypertrophy and muscle growth. And then when you're kind of considering it that way, another idea is to train the deadlift at lower reps for kind of sub-maximal ranges. So if you're taking your max deadlift and you do it for 3 sets of 3 at 80%, well, that probably allows you to maintain a lot of the neural adaptations and some of those strength-related things to the deadlift without actually training it to a way that it has a sizable amount of fatigue and you're able to recover week to week that way. So that's kind of two different ideas. I wouldn't do both of those at the same time, but you can go through periods where you're relying on a lot of hypertrophy exercises in other ways and only trying to maintain your deadlift within 3x3 at 80% kind of rep range once a week. Or you could do, say, a rep max, like a 5 rep max or a 3 rep max once a week, and that would be a different way to do that. So those are two different ideas that could each be integrated, not at the same time. Some other exercises, though, that also make really good variations that you can train would be doing what I've posted in some of my training videos, which is doing snatch pulls or clean pulls. Now, if you're not an Olympic weightlifter, then doing these might be difficult to gauge what weight you should do. So the way that I do it is that since I'm not a proficient lifter, I'm kind of new to the snatch and the clean and jerk, I use the Russian kind of guidelines on how much you should be able to lift based on your front squat. So if I take my front squat, which is 385 pounds, according to those old Russian Soviet texts on Olympic weightlifting, you should be able to clean and jerk about 85% of your front squat. Now, there's a huge range in weights, so this is really just a rough estimate or a way to get a starting point. You may have to make further adaptations even if you use these and know how to do it. So I'll have two that are these, and then I'll have a third that is probably less technical and less percentage based of these exercises. So if we're doing the front squat, take 85% of that, and that's probably about what your max clean should be. So a common progression would be to do, say, 5 sets of 5 at 90% of your clean, and you're going to do those in a manner that is like a clean pull, which is different than a deadlift. It has both a concentric and an eccentric loading portion, and it has kind of a very dynamic pull back into the hips at the top of the lift. The snatch pulls are very similar. You take a snatch grip, you pull them back into your hips. So for the percentage for this, though, they say that you should be able to snatch about 80% of your clean and jerk. So if you take that clean and jerk, what you estimated your clean and jerk max to be, now you're going to use that estimate to get another estimate, so you can see where this starts to get a little fuzzy as far as this is really just a starting place, but you'll take about 80% of that number and say that's probably about what my snatch should be. And similarly, a normal progression would be that you do 3 sets of 3 at 90%. If you go down, you might be able to do 5 sets of 5 at 85%, and so on, kind of with a progression like that. The other exercise that I would say is really good is both the stiff leg deadlift and the snatch grip stiff leg deadlift. Both of these are really good hypertrophy exercises that you can do more frequently, say maybe once or twice a week, doing any of these. I end up doing about 3 times a week of pulls, and this is in addition to snatch and clean and jerk, but depending on where you're at in your lifting career, you might have a very low work capacity where you haven't developed the ability to do a lot of work and recover from a lot of work, or you might have a very high capacity and you might be able to do these things a lot more frequently. Also, your body dimensions might make a big difference on how frequently you can do things like deadlift. Some people are able to do deadlift very frequently. Lifted like 4 or 5 times.
Stretch it down and extending back up.
Probably
Work your lower
torso, short legs compared to his arm length. He probably didn't move the bar very far to get from ground to lockout. So those are things that make a huge difference on your coverable, maximum recoverable volume in terms of being able to come back and do a lift more frequently without getting burned or too fatigued to continue, to see progression week after week, month after month, etc. So that's it. Hopefully you guys found it informative. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I will talk to you guys in the next video.